Have you ever noticed how much we love to organize stuff? Like our shoes. We've got our sneakers for running, our nicer shoes when we need to dress up, flip-flops for the beach. It's kind of satisfying to have everything in its place,
It
right?
is. Our brains love order.
Totally. But it gets, well, a little more complicated when we try to do that with people.
It sure does. And history's given us way too many examples of that. Every society seems to think it's found the right way to organize itself, with social hierarchies that put some groups above others.
Yeah, that's what we're digging into today, those hierarchies, those myths of history, and just how much of it is based on, well, maybe not much truth at all.
Because when you really look across different cultures and time periods, there's this pattern, this really stark pattern. I mean, every large society we've studied has some form of discrimination baked right in.
Whoa, okay, so we're jumping right into it, huh? So even the societies we tend to think of as being more progressive, they weren't exactly beacons of equality.
Not exactly, no.
Huh.
Take Hammurabi's Code, for instance. Groundbreaking for its time, sure, but it also had this hierarchy built right into it. You had superiors, commoners, and slaves.
Right, right.
And before we go thinking this is just ancient history, let's not forget our own founding fathers here in the U.S. All men are created equal.
While some of them own slaves.
Exactly.
It's that hypocrisy, you know? These big ideals, but the reality is totally different. Makes you wonder how much of this is really about differences between people and how much is about holding on to power.
That's the million-dollar question, and the source we're looking at today really digs into it. It uses the Indian caste system as an example, which is often seen as this fixed, almost divinely ordained thing.
Right, right.
But if you dig a little deeper, even that system is rooted in mythology.
Wait, mythology, like gods and creation stories.
Yep. One origin myth for the caste system claims that each caste came from a different part of the body of this primordial god. Brahmins, who were priests and scholars, they came from the head. Kshatriyas, the warriors and rulers, they came from the arms. And so on, all the way down to the Dalits, who were assigned the lowest tasks, coming from the feet.
Hold on, so where you landed in society, your job, who you could marry, all decided by what body part you supposedly came from. Talk about a bad break.
And talk about an advantage for those at the top. It's not just social, it's divine. Questioning the system means questioning the gods themselves.
It's really amazing how these systems, which seem kind of random when you think about it, become so deeply embedded. But why bother? What's the advantage of creating these divisions?
Well, that's where this idea of pollution comes in. It's been used to justify hierarchies for a long, long time.
Pollution. Okay, that seems kind of intense. We're not talking about literal garbage here.
No, not trash or anything like that, but it's a powerful metaphor. Think about it. If someone's sick, you instinctively don't want to get too close, right? Self-preservation.
Yeah, totally.
But throughout history, that instinct gets twisted. Suddenly, you're not just avoiding a sick person, you're avoiding an entire group of people.
It's like that saying, one bad apple spoils the bunch. But the bad apple is determined by your social class, your religion.
Exactly. And the source uses India's caste system as a prime example. It wasn't just about jobs, it was every part of life. Food, marriage, even where you could live, all based on this idea that being near someone from a lower caste could somehow taint you.
All about control, right. Maintain those divisions to keep power. But this pollution thing,
Yep.
it feels kind of familiar, like something we still see today.
You're right on the money. The source actually brings up the American South after slavery was abolished. Even though it was illegal, the fear of Black people polluting white society fueled so much of the segregation and discrimination.
So even though the laws changed, the attitudes didn't.
Exactly. And it created this terrible cycle. Black people were denied opportunities, then blamed for not being as successful, which then proved the racist point to begin with. Just messed up.
It's just awful how this idea has been used to hurt so many people.
Yeah.
But we can't talk about social hierarchies without talking about men and women, right? That's like the biggest one, and it's everywhere. So is it just, I don't know, destiny, biology?
The age-old question, nature versus nurture, and the source dives into it with this crazy story from ancient China.
Okay, hit me with it.
So archaeologists found these oracle bones, basically ancient fortune-telling tools. On one, someone asked about a pregnant woman if she'd be lucky. The answer, only if it's a boy. Girl, not lucky.
Wow, way to start life off on the wrong foot. Guess some things never change, huh?
Well, some things do, thankfully, but for a long, long time, women were seen as property, not people. And the laws around rape really showed that.
Oh no, don't tell me it's one of those different times arguments.
No, no, not at all. It's about how widespread it was to view rape as a crime against a woman's father or husband, not her.
So the victim was the man who owned her. That's
Oh,
just, wow.
exactly. The source even mentions how in the Bible, a rapist has to pay the woman's father, and then she becomes his property.
Okay, that's enough Bible study for one day.
Yeah.
But seriously, this wasn't some fringe belief. It was the norm in a lot of places for a long time.
It's a lot to process, for sure. Makes you realize how far we've come, but also how much further we have to go.
Sure. But going back to this biology versus culture thing, I mean, women give birth, that's biology 101. But does that really explain this whole power dynamic?
The source argues that biology might set the scene, but culture writes the play.
I like that. So what kind of play was ancient Athens putting on? Because they weren't exactly known for their feminist ideals, right?
Let's just say it wasn't a feminist utopia. Imagine if you were a woman, you couldn't vote, own property,
Yeah.
basically couldn't do anything important just because you had a uterus. You were basically owned by your father or husband.
That's rough. So while Socrates is out there debating philosophy, women with the same brains can't even be in the room.
Sounds crazy now, but that was life. And it wasn't just Greece. Throughout history, women have been silenced, pushed aside, had their contributions minimized.
It's infuriating, but not surprising, sadly. But what about that argument that men are just, I don't know, wired to be more competitive, more assertive, while women are more nurturing, more passive? Is that just how we are, or is that another one of those stories we tell ourselves?
And that's where things get really interesting because, yeah, men and women, on average, have different hormones and tendencies. But the source argues that those biological differences are blown way out of proportion to justify the status quo.
So it's like biology might give you a little push in one direction, but culture builds the whole highway system.
Nailed it. To prove the point, the source introduces us to bonobos.
Bonobos,
Yeah.
like those super chill chimpanzees.
The very same. And get this, female bonobos, even though they're physically smaller, they run the show, they team up, raise their young together, even put those aggressive males in check.
See? Girl power, it's practically prehistoric.
Yeah.
But for real, if bonobos can have a more equal society, what's our excuse?
That's what scientists have been trying to figure out, right? The source doesn't pretend to have all the answers, but it does make you rethink those just-so stories we tell about men and women.
We love to come up with reasons for things, even when those reasons fall apart if you look too closely.
Exactly.
Like we're so focused on finding a biological reason for these power imbalances that we forget to consider a much simpler, maybe scarier truth. What if these hierarchies aren't natural at all? What if we made them? And that means we can break them. So we've been talking about how culture kind of twists biology to fit its own agenda, right? But what about when biology itself messes with those neat little boxes we try to put people in?
You're bringing us to the next layer of this whole thing. We've been focusing on how women have been treated, but there's another part of this gender hierarchy we haven't really touched on: sexuality. How cultures view sexuality plays a huge role in these power dynamics, too.
Right, because it's not just about who's on top. It's about deciding what's normal,
Yeah.
even when it comes to love.
Exactly. And the source points out that biologically, being attracted to the same sex is totally natural. We see it throughout history across different cultures, even in animals.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we've all seen those nature shows with penguins adopting orphan chicks or bonobos where everyone's pretty fluid.
Exactly. Nature's often way ahead of us when it comes to diversity. And the source makes this great point. It says, biology enables, but culture forbids.
Okay, I like that. Break that down for me.
It's about the clash between what we're capable of and what society tells us is okay. Our bodies can do amazing things, have a whole range of experiences. A woman can be a scientist, a leader, a warrior. A man can be a caregiver, an artist, in touch with his emotions. But whether those things are celebrated or condemned, that's up to culture.
So it's like we're given this incredible toolbox,
Yeah.
right? All this potential. But instead of celebrating what we could build, we're told we can only use certain tools in certain ways. And anyone who colors outside the lines, well, they're a problem.
Perfect analogy. That's how deep this stuff goes. We mistake these cultural rules for laws of nature.
Makes you think, if these hierarchies aren't about biology, if they're not some command from above, what are they holding on to? Why is it so hard to break free?
Well, the source actually goes through some of the big theories about why male dominance sticks around. And you might be surprised to hear that none of them really hold water.
Oh, I love a good myth busting. Let's do it.
All right, so theory number one, might makes right.
Mm.
Men are generally stronger than women, so naturally they're in charge.
Except, wait a minute. History's full of examples where physical strength wasn't the deciding factor. You've got older rulers controlling huge empires, brilliant strategists beating bigger armies.
Exactly. And don't forget, you had slave owners in the American South controlling people who were physically stronger than them. Muscle doesn't equal power.
Okay, so strength is out. What about the aggression argument? We've talked about how historically men have been responsible for a lot of violence.
True, but does being aggressive make you a good leader, especially when it comes to something as complex as war or governing? The source says no way. Real leadership takes strategy, diplomacy, empathy, knowing how to inspire people.
Plus, let's be real,
Mm.
some of the worst tyrants in history were driven by aggression. And look what happened. They destroyed everything.
Exactly. All that force, no brains or heart, it's disaster waiting to happen.
Okay, so no brawn, no aggression. What about evolution? That whole idea that men are wired for competition and women are naturally more nurturing, more passive, that seems like a popular one.
Ah, the classic biology is destiny argument. It's tempting, I'll give you that. But
Yeah.
then you've got examples like, well, bonobos again, that totally contradict it.
Right. Those peace-loving matriarchal bonobos, always up for a cuddle and a good compromise,
Yeah.
really throws a wrench in that men are from Mars, women are from Venus thing.
Right. It just shows how easy it is to pick and choose biological facts to fit our biases.
We really want to find a biological excuse for these power imbalances, don't we? But maybe the truth is simpler and a lot less comfortable.
Mm.
What if these hierarchies aren't natural at all? What if we created them? And if we created them,
We can break them.
exactly. If history shows us anything, it's that societies change. We evolve, we adapt, we leave old ways of thinking behind. Even having this conversation, questioning these things, that's proof.
It's empowering, isn't it? Knowing that we're not stuck with some ancient script. We can write our own stories, create a world that's fair and just. And that's what this all comes down to. It's not about finding all the answers right now. It's about asking the tough questions, staying curious, and never giving up on building a better future. So, to everyone listening, what about you? What outdated myths, what limiting beliefs are we still holding on to? And how do we finally break free?
That's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Thanks for listening.